Recording in progress.
There we are. We're officially being recorded. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this afternoon to join us. As I'm certain every single one of you knows, it is LGBTQ plus Pride Month this month. And I'm especially thankful for a whole lot of things this month, including the outreach from Montgomery County, specifically Donna Richmond, who reached out to put together this panel to have this conversation. Thank you, all of you, for joining. The panel for today, of course, is called Cultivating Inclusive Leadership to Create Lasting Change. In the lead up to this, in speaking with Donna, we talked a lot about what does leadership look like during Pride Month, and how can we reach out both to members of the LGBTQ plus communities, but also to all of our allies to help build a better understanding of what inclusive change can look like. I have just one housekeeping matter, and it's something that I'm certain many of you know, but that's LGBTQ, the acronym. I often say LGBT when I'm talking about specifically public policy issues, in part because governments seem to only try to impact our rights for identifying as LGBT. Our community is so much more. We're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, queer, questioning, intersex, allied, asexual, pansexual. We're gender non-binary, we're gender non-conforming, we are two-spirit, and more, and growing, and plus. And I love that about who our communities are. And I think what we are often doing is giving permission to all people to really be themselves and be their best selves. My name is Brian Sims. I am a former legislator in Pennsylvania. I served for 10 years in the House of Representatives representing Philadelphia. I had the honor of being the first openly LGBTQ person elected to the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and served for those 10 years as a co-chair of the LGBTQ Equality Caucus and served on the governor's LGBTQ commission. My background is that I'm an attorney by trade. I've worked in civil rights, I've worked in disability law, and I've worked on a lot of policy law. And I now work for an organization called Out Leadership, which works with companies to help get them to support us in ways that they say that they have and do. But when asked to put together this panel about inclusive leadership, it was very clear to me that there were two people that I wanted to make sure joined this conversation and joined this discussion, in part because I know their experience with inclusive leadership and as inclusive leaders, and in part because they are close friends of mine because of that and the work that they've done. I am going to give them sort of short introductions, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. But we're joined today by an attorney, Nellie Fitzpatrick. Nellie has worked in city government. They have worked in private practice. And they are somebody that I have turned to for years because of their public policy expertise. Nellie, would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, everybody. As Brian said, my name's Nellie. I've worked in multiple government offices. I've worked for 2 different district attorneys, 2 different mayors. And I've had the honor of working with government officials both throughout Philadelphia and in other areas, including at a federal level. And it's really an honor to be here, and I'm glad to see Montgomery County continuing the conversation and moving it forward. And I'll just say, you know, Brian, I noticed you said one thing real quick, that we're LGBTQ, QIA plus and growing. I would say we've always been here. Our community isn't growing, but our ability to talk about who we are and have words to describe who we are to everyone, that certainly is growing. And I'm hopeful we can help shed some light on some of that growing language today.
I am certain that we're going to try.
Yeah.
We're joined by Deja Alvarez. Deja Lynn Alvarez is a public health specialist, a policy expert, and has been a candidate for public office, a groundbreaking candidate for public office in Philadelphia. Deja, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, Brian just introduced me. So I am the former LGBTQ care coordinator for the Department of Public Health for Philadelphia. I'm currently the deputy director of TPAC WHCI. And as Brian said, I'm a former candidate for public office and a very proud Latina transgender woman.
Thank you, Deja. So the purpose of our panel here today is to discuss how inclusive leadership has impacted our lives and how we can create lasting change for inclusive leaders. Nellie, Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into advocacy and activism and sort of how you grew into the leader that you are now?
Sure. I actually ended up moving to Philadelphia from Florida. I wanted to be a trial attorney and specifically help victims of certain types of crimes. And while in school in Florida, I was told multiple times that I was not allowed to go to court into certain courtrooms without wearing a skirt. People who were identified by others, not necessarily by themselves, as being female, had to wear skirts in a courtroom. And for me, I might as well have been in drag because that's what it would have been for me. And I kept wearing pants and getting kicked out of court. And so I found my way up to the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office simply so that I could practice as an attorney and as a government servant as who I am. And in doing that, what happened was, instead of being just able to become a good sex crimes prosecutor and really do the work of helping very vulnerable victims, I started seeing that there were populations throughout our city that were invisible to so many systems and to so many places. And so I got to work as fast as possible, trying to really open up a dialogue and some understanding of so many folks who just were not being served, whether by police, prosecutors, public defenders, judges that didn't understand who they were. And that role just grew and grew. And soon enough, my advocacy and activism helping LGBTQ people sort of took over my work. And that's the path that I took and how I ended up being asked to join a mayor's cabinet instead of just working as a line prosecutor.
Nellie, I know a lot of people often talk about our sort of day jobs and our gay jobs. And
Right.
sometimes when they do cross over, at what point did you begin to see that something like that was beginning to happen? You were doing a lot of very good work, but it wasn't centered around the LGBTQ plus communities. Were specific prosecutors coming to you for advice and guidance? Were you beginning to get calls for incidents that needed a culturally competent response? Sort of, how did that go from being something that you were good at and cared about to something that others began to sort of rely on you for?
Kind of all the above, what you said. I found that, being in a courtroom every single day, I had a lot of contact with law enforcement. And the thing that I found that was so heartbreaking and also hopeful in many ways was receiving anonymous notes from police officers who both identify as transgender and were not out in the police department asking for help with educating the police department in how to support other officers. And then also police officers reaching out and saying, hey, there's a victim that I heard about, but I don't think anything's happening for them. Can you help? And starting to do that work, then I started getting calls from community. I started getting calls from judges. I started getting calls from places that really kind of surprised me. And I earned a reputation of being a person that you could ask any question to. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to provide information. And so it was one closed door meeting after another. And in doing that work, it really started to take up the majority of my workday. And I really, for a long time, held two full-time jobs as a prosecutor with about 100 to 120 major trial caseload, and as a point person for really all the intersections of our criminal legal systems. And then that slowly bled out into also city council questions and other government questions, and then into other counties. And that work just slowly pulled me out of a courtroom and into a lot of government bodies that needed some work. So yeah, I think looking the way I did, people made a lot of assumptions that I was different than any prosecutor that they had seen. So seeing my short hair, seeing suits that they couldn't tell if it came from the women's department or men's department, shoes that I got compliments on from primarily male attorneys. I think that they just read me as somebody who could answer some questions, and I started doing it and I haven't stopped.
Deja, I have a very similar question for you. I know from your life experience that you were often called upon to offer assistance, guidance, to help resolve issues in the LGBTQ plus community in Philadelphia, and that it sort of grew into your career. How did that happen? And when did it begin?
So Nellie had mentioned earlier, noticing that there were entire populations of people that were being marginalized by all of these different systems. I was one of those people. And after years of having to survive in the street and doing things strictly in survival mode, there was many years of abuse by these systems, whether it was police or local government or agencies that were set up to help everyone else but us. And after years of watching myself and some of my, or a lot of my LGBTQ plus siblings be abused by these systems, one night an issue occurred with a super abusive police officer that we had complained about on numerous occasions. Nothing was ever done when we complained because we were just seen as, well, we had it coming. If we were going to be out doing what the rest of the world was doing, going to bars, having drinks, or doing whatever else, we were going to have to suffer this abuse. And one night I pushed back, fought back, and it turned into a physical altercation. I had had enough at that point, and so I pushed back and fought back, and I went to the press, and I went and found a lawyer, and I filed suit against the city of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Police Department. And it just kind of grew from there, because in that moment I stopped being afraid. I realized that if there was ever going to be any change, that my life was already at risk every day, just walking down any street at any given time. And so if I was going to be at risk, I might as well be at risk for making a difference. And it just kind of snowballed from there. Once I found my voice, I never shut up.
Well, the conversation here is about inclusive leadership. And oftentimes for those of us that are in marginalized communities, especially in the LGBTQ plus communities, we don't have mentors and sponsors and leaders in the places that we want to be, right? The barriers to being in so many places is that we were not there before, which often means that when we do have mentors and when we do have inclusive leaders, that they are not LGBTQ plus. Nellie, tell me, you were able to transition from doing a lot of this work to be able to make this your day job. And that's both through a lot of expertise and a bunch of sheer will, but it's also because others saw in you the capacity to do this. Tell me about an inclusive leader that positively impacted your career and your own leadership.
Yeah, so the very first person that comes to mind is former Mayor Michael Nutter. He honestly sat me down and told me a story about how his mentor happened to be a gay Black man who was John Anderson and an elected official in Philadelphia, and how that man shared so much of himself in his learning about how to lead in a city that it really impacted Mayor Nutter. And so he very much, I felt, in some ways, was very cognizant and aware of the LGBTQ people around him, and in other ways he wasn't. He saw what needed to be done and he just got to it. And so there were many times where we would talk and his only question would be, what is the right thing to do? And that often required me educating him a lot about certain folks and who transgender people really are and how widely diverse that word alone is. And then the other side of that coin would be him for sharing that information, then sharing information with me on how to navigate really difficult systems. And a lot of times he would ask, where are you getting the most resistance? And at that time, it was the Philadelphia prisons, who you couldn't really just walk into a prison and start trying to change policy, certainly not as a former DA and certainly not as an LGBT person. And he really just saw everyone as necessary to be at the table, that he might not understand who they are, but he knows that they are in our city. And it was almost just this mutual respect that made him such a mentor for me. His ability to be vulnerable and say what he didn't know, his ability to mess up left and right on certain things, and then just say, was that wrong? I'm sorry, I apologize, and fix a pronoun, or say, I'm not sure that I understand what that means, and publicly do so. And I really think that it set the tone for a lot of other folks around to kind of put down the worries and the guard and ask the questions. And for me, it made me really see that he had certain skills and a capacity to see a full human being and to know that he doesn't know everything about them. And that really stuck with me. So he's just the first one that comes to mind, you know.
Deja, clearly you have had leadership and mentorship in your life, and you've had people that have supported your own leadership. Who have been some of the inclusive leaders in your life that have helped you to have this leadership position that you're in now?
I just want to know if I understand the question correctly. They can be LGBTQ or non-LGBTQ.
Absolutely.
Okay, so actually both of you are two of the biggest influences. I'm gonna get emotional. Are two of the biggest influences in my life, that two people that had leadership positions, that saw somebody that had potential or had the guts to just simply stand up and show up in rooms that other people like me just were too afraid to show up in because we were not welcome in those spaces. So the two of you would be the first two that I would have to point out as far as mentorship, people that were in leadership positions and didn't care what anybody else thought, but you reached kind of back from where you come from in a way, or reached into communities that you saw were still very much marginalized and being hit hard by these systems, and opened some doors so that I could walk through those doors and took a chance. There have been others that have had leadership positions. There's been multiple deputy commissioners and commissioners of police. You know, Jim Kenney, honestly, for whatever he is or isn't doing now, he was one of those people as well that when he became mayor, he still maintained a relationship that I could still call on when we needed more help in the community. So there have been several, but you two, honestly, and I'm not just saying that because you two are on here, you two both know this, that you two are two of the biggest influences of my life and two of the most supportive leaders that were very influential in me becoming who I am today and doing all the work that I've been able to do.
You know, I think it's probably a good time for us to kind of have this conversation a little bit, is that one of the phrases that the three of us hear often and repeat often is a line by Barney Frank, the first openly LGBTQ member of Congress, who often said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you are probably on the menu. And a part of sort of knowing who should be at the table is knowing who's on the menu. And oftentimes there's a lot of insight and a lot of blindness that privilege can cause people to see or not to see who's being harmed. Much of this stems from empathy. And as I'm prone to saying, empathy is not something that is equally shared by all people in the United States. And in fact, it turns out, and this is no surprise, that women, for example, are especially empathetic, significantly more empathetic than men in the United States. There is no biological component to empathy whatsoever. Empathy is among the skills that you learn when you are not the top of the pyramid, when you are not the ultimate privileged class in a situation. You have to learn to understand how people operate. What do they think? Where are they going to go? Why? What motivates people? It's a skill set that is learned. It is also true virtually of almost all minorities compared to the proverbial majority in the United States. People of color are significantly more empathetic than white people in the United States. First and second generation immigrants have higher empathy scores in the United States than longer term Americans. And it is true of the LGBTQ plus communities, although the data from white, cis, gay men often screws it up a lot, which is important for me to point out. Empathy is literally putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's when you make a decision about how something's going to impact people, making sure that it's not just you who you are thinking about. It's so much of the work that all of us do with respect to elected officials and policymakers and decision makers, is making sure that they are thinking about this person, this community, this place, this plant, in ways that they might not be thinking of otherwise. And what comes with that is the innate ability to think about other people, which for me is one of the primary aspects of inclusive leadership. I can't imagine how somebody would know that a person needed to be at the table unless they were able to be aware of the fact that they were not. Nellie, this is a trait of yours that I find that is especially powerful in your personality, is that you are and seem to be very, very good at having an understanding of sort of who is missing in a conversation. Maybe a better way of, Shirley Chisholm used to say, if they don't invite you to the table, bring a folding chair. You seem to be very good at bringing in the folding chair. How and why do you think you're capable of seeing other communities and other people that are unlike you and knowing that they should be at that table?
You know, I think it's just a simple fact that if you look around our country, we are so diverse. We are so beautifully diverse. And I would walk into so many rooms where I was the first person like me in the room, but yet I walk in with a tremendous amount of privilege. And so I think that commonality that we share as LGBTQ people, just being in the minority population when it comes to how we identify or who we love, gave me this really foundational understanding that there are more people that are not here in this room. Because our community is so diverse, it was very simple for me to say, well, here's who I am, but I know that there is a young Black gay man who is not at this table. I know that there is a trans Latina who is not at this table. I know that and back then, heck, we didn't really even have language when we started doing this. I knew that there were non-binary people that were not at the table, and I knew that I was one of them and didn't even really have the words to explain that part of myself yet. And listening and getting to know people who are nothing like me, who have not had life experiences like me. I grew up in Florida. I mean, my growing up was wildly different than other people that I was having the opportunity to meet. Just knowing that you got to get as many people in the room as you can. It makes for a better conversation. It makes for better policy. It makes for a better understanding. And that also meant really trying to understand, listen, and get to know the people who maybe were keeping the doors closed to people like me, and learning why, what they're afraid of, what they're not seeing, what I'm not seeing about them. And so I think just endless curiosity and endless wanting to learn and know about more and more people just kind of allowed me to just start to see who's not there. And I would just say, if you're ever in a room and you're looking around and you really have a sense of who's in the room, you feel like you really can relate to everyone in the room. Maybe you think you all kind of like the same TV shows, you're going out to the same restaurants, you're talking about the same football team. If you're noticing a whole lot of similarities and you're not learning something new about somebody that you're like, wow, that is a new way to think about it, that is a cool thing to think or do or see, maybe you need to find a way to listen and bring some more people in to make a better conversation, a better workplace, a better world.
Deja, I see you nodding, and one of the reasons I know you're nodding is there's a phrase that I think of often that our friend Adrian Rivera Reyes used to say. He used to say, don't pretend to give a voice to the voiceless, give them a microphone. Yes. All of us that do this kind of work try to keep an eye towards the people that are not in the room. But it's not often to pass along their sentiment, it's to bring them there so that their sentiment can be heard directly. You have a track record of being that person in a whole lot of situations. Talk to me a little bit more about sort of what it means to be a first, to be somebody that's breaking ground, to sort of find yourself as the only self of your like you in a place, and to still move forward, maybe not without fear, but despite fear.
I think, one of the things you mentioned it earlier is that you have to be able to not just think about yourself, but to think about the big picture, because you're under so much pressure and you see so many wrongs, and you can get caught up very easily in the negative. And if you get caught up in that negative, then you stop moving forward. And if you stop moving forward, then how do you continue opening those doors for other people to walk through? So it does take you to a place of being very selfless and continuing to put yourself in kind of like that line of fire, because being an LGBTQ person, you're not just in that line of fire from people that are non-LGBTQ. You're in that line of fire from other LGBTQ people, from other marginalized communities, from, you end up kind of being in the center of a circular firing squad. And
I'm going to say, not only do I've heard you sort of discuss this a little bit before about sort of how it's impossible to do this kind of work. It's impossible to sort of face this kind of opposition without recognizing the other people doing similar work and facing similar opposition. And it can be hard not to absorb all of that. And yet you're still able to be strong. You're still able to be sort of resolute. Something that both of you have talked about, and I have without using the actual word, really is allyship. The best way to sort of build allyship is to be allies. And both of you are very strong allies to communities that you are not from, and you are strong advocates for the communities that you are. Allyship is sort of the name of the game right now. And for me, when I think of an inclusive leader, I am thinking of an ally first and foremost. But that's complicated these days, right? As we often say, ally is a noun, or it is not a noun, it's a verb. Right? Ally isn't what you say you are, it's what you do. And hopefully those of us that are impacted will say, hey, way to be an ally, you're being an ally. But it can be complicated. And we know what performative allyship looks like. We know what no allyship looks like. But part of the reason it's so complicated is because the attacks on us right now are different than they have been, certainly in my lifetime. By the end of this month, and if not by the end of this month, probably by the end of September, there will be 600 anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced in state legislatures across the United States. For people that don't know what that looks like contextually, just 4 years ago at this same time, I believe there were 38. 11 of them were here in Pennsylvania. It is what you think you are hearing about the massive attacks on LGBTQ people, specifically trans people, specifically the children of LGBTQ people and LGBTQ plus children, and the drag community. You're not just hearing more because the news is covering it more, you're hearing more because these attacks are increasing massively. And I think a lot of our allies right now want to be here with us as best allies that they can be. And many of them don't know how. And some of that has to do with getting it wrong. And getting it wrong is one of those things that, especially when we're trying to be right, and we are righteous, getting it wrong can sometimes feel very defeating, and it can make people back away. I know in my own allyship, I have screwed this up a lot, and I have been granted the grace. I have the privilege to have been able to sort of get back up and learn from my mistakes and try to get it right again, and still get it wrong a few times. But a lot of people are so afraid of getting it wrong because, well, for lots of different reasons, that they don't try. And so I want to have this conversation with both of you. What's it like when people screw up on their support for you? It's a simple question. I know it's a little weird question, but it's a simple question.
Great question.
I pay a lot of attention to people's intention. If I know their intention is good and they get a pronoun wrong or they say the wrong thing, paying attention to their intentions is extremely important. And I know that it's hard for some people that are, having a rough way to go and are dealing with a lot of things all at once. But I think that's how we create better allies and we help our allies grow, is by recognizing their intention. If they make a mistake, let's not take their head off or try to discard them because they made a simple mistake. Let's show them how they correct that and then move forward. People come to me all the time and they're like, well, Deja, I'm not sure, what to say to this person, or what pronoun, or what if I get it wrong? And I always tell people, listen, if you get it wrong, don't get stuck like a deer in headlights. Just apologize, use the correct term or correct yourself, and then move forward. And I think that we're in this time or place where it's not either your way or my way. There's a whole lot of gray area, and we need allies more now than ever. Like Brian, like you said, in your lifetime, you've never seen this kind of attacks and this amount of legislation, nor have I. So it's more important than ever that we have our allies, and therefore we have to kind of help coach our allies on how to be better without treating them the way that we should be treating our enemies.
Nellie, I saw you nodding that entire time.
Yeah, and I want to, with a small caveat, and that is what Deja said, intention is what matters. But what I would say is, as an ally, getting it wrong is getting it right. Practice being an ally. We practice medicine, we practice law, we practice a lot of things as human beings. Practice allyship. Even if, say, you don't even know what that means. For those of you who are like, what does it mean to be an ally? What is it? I don't even understand what they're saying. What that means is whether or not somebody there is standing next to you who's LGBT or not, and you hear somebody saying something violent or cruel, or maybe that is inaccurate, maybe just stop them. Maybe say, hey, that's not okay with me. It's not your job to educate them. They need to educate themselves, but let it be known that you're not somebody who's going to nod along to talking about things that are really hurtful and harmful and maybe inaccurate. And know that as you're doing that and trying, and maybe you get it wrong here and there, that means a world of difference for somebody out there, even when you might think it's small. So allyship really is just saying, no, I'm not somebody who sees trans kids as a pawn in a political war. Trans kids have always been here. LGBT kids have always been here. If you could influence somebody to be a certain gender or be a certain sexual orientation, myself, Brian, and Deja would not be sitting here talking to this group, because growing up in Florida, I didn't have a mirror for knowing what it meant to be LGBT. I certainly didn't see anybody around me who was trans, and I certainly didn't see anybody around me who was non-binary that I could relate to. I still don't see many people like me around me, even doing the work that I do. So know that this is the tiniest population, no matter how much space it's taking up right now, no matter how it's being talked about. And these are just people, we're all just trying to live. All three of us, if we could have been influenced to be something, we would have been straight. We would have been the same gender that was stamped on our birth certificates, because that's all we learned. And it's really that simple. Being an ally and sticking up for LGBT people, you're not creating more LGBT people. You're just simply saying, I'm a strong enough human being to know we don't bully people when they're a smaller team. We're kind of, I don't know, LGBT people are like the Pee Wee football team compared to the NFL out there. There's not many of us, no matter how loud we get, and we're loud because we have to be seen, especially for the little ones of us that are out there. So practice allyship. Getting it wrong is getting it right. Ask questions. Know that there are people like us out there that will answer your questions no matter how much you think they might be inappropriate. We're not going to cancel you. We're going to listen to you, help you, and appreciate the fact that you want to learn about us and help us.
Nellie, the question, and Donna just asked it, about how people can show up as an ally. It's something that I try to both emulate. I want to model in my own allyship. I will say this till my last breath. There is no woman in my life that needs to hear that I am a feminist more than the men in this world who are not need to hear from me why I am. There's no person of color in this world that needs to hear that I support justice and equality for black and brown people in America more than they need me to say it to white people who do not. And the same is true with LGBTQ allyship and support. And so that's maybe one of the places to start, is that years ago, we used to talk about sort of microaggressions in the DE&I space, the little ways that we all felt like we were being excluded. Every single example was cis, straight, white, middle class. And we're at a point now where I believe that micro-inclusivity is also something that's really important. Every queer person I've ever met in my life is really good at code reading, understands in a room when people are supportive and when they are not, understands the difference between intentions and actions. And those little ways that you as allies can show that kind of support goes miles. When you're giving an example, making that example have two moms, making that example be a Latina instead of always be white, making those examples be inclusive. To the vast majority of people in that room that are not those things, all they're hearing is that, examples don't always have to be about them, which is also an important lesson to learn. But the people who are among those people that you've just heard might, for the very first time, hear themselves, their lives, their family, their community referenced as just an average everyday example. That is wildly powerful. The same goes for things like including your pronouns in your signature. A lot of people think, oh, that doesn't impact me or anybody around me. I promise it does. And there's a really important reason it does. And that reason has to do with sort of what I call the unicorn effect. It turns out in the United States that when you tell someone that they are somebody's hero, when you tell somebody that they are somebody else's sort of mentor, they are more likely to rise to the occasion with their behavior. When they believe that others are modeling their goodness, their behavior on them, they're more likely to reflect that kind of behavior. And it turns out that, as Nellie just pointed out, the LGBTQ plus communities in America are simply not large enough to make the kind of qualitative change that we need right now, or the change that we have made. The reason we have gotten to this point is because of the support of our very strong allies. If we are going to get through this period of time, if we end this year and there are 1,000 bills attacking LGBTQ plus people, the way they're going to get through it is with the support of our allies. Deja, give me, I'm going to ask you of examples of ways that you have seen allies be supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. Nellie just had one that I think is really important. And that's saying, hey, I don't find that funny, or I find that hurtful. I've seen this used and I try to do this as often as I can with respect to sexism and misogyny. Men often will try to relate to each other, to try to almost ease discomfort of not knowing people by casual sexism, thinking it's something everyone can relate to. And when another man says, hey, that's not okay, that's not funny, you don't have to teach them lessons about misogyny and sexism, just that groundbreaking stop, that it can be very effective. Where have you seen effective allyship in your life?
Where have I seen it? Okay, so I'll use the Philadelphia Police Department. For instance, we all know police don't always get it right. There's a big fight right now, and there has been for many years, and it's very needed, very justified, because there are some racist cops and there are some bigoted cops on the force. But there was a couple of deputy commissioners over the last decade that were absolutely amazing allies. Like, even though they didn't understand everything, and they would lean over to me in a particular meeting and say, like, Deja, I'm not sure what to say here. I'm not sure what to do here. This is a deputy commissioner of the Philadelphia Police Department sitting next to a Latina trans woman that, has had to do survival sex work and, had to beat addiction and all these other things. And now asking for advice on, okay, what do I say here? What do I do here in this moment to make sure that my officers understand that we cannot discriminate against anybody, even based off of their gender identity? So it showed up there. It has showed up in the political world in certain rooms. There are people that you would have never dreamed in a million years would be the way that they are, particularly with the trans person, particularly with the trans woman, that whenever they see me in a room, they beeline for me and they're like, Deja, where you been? Arms open, grabbing me, hugging me, treating me the way that they treat every other woman in that room, not treating me differently because they know I'm trans. And that I've seen that change a lot over the years. So I'm just using the police department.
Those are great
I've
examples.
done a lot of work with the police department and the political world, because there are a lot of times that people in these worlds that hold the power have not been in spaces with people like me. And now and you can look around the room sometimes when you see some of these leaders react to me the way that they do, and other people going, oh, okay, so I guess she's okay. Or I guess it's okay to treat them like I treat everybody else. And these people were just doing it, not being conscious of being an ally, just because they had gotten to know me as a person. So they didn't even necessarily recognize that what they were doing was creating other allies in the space.
And overtly modeling allyship by allowing their allyship to be seen. And because silent allyship is something that exists, but is not particularly helpful. And I think that's one of the things that I try to think of a lot during Pride Month, is that, yeah, there's so much that we are proud of as the LGBTQ plus communities, but also what I think of is the fact that many of the people that support us, and let's be very clear, the majority of Americans are wildly supportive of LGBTQ plus equality. The majority of Pennsylvanians are wildly supportive of LGBTQ plus equality, even though we have not amended the Human Relations Act yet to include it. The problem is that the veracity of that support is pretty low often. Sometimes it's because people think we don't need that much support anymore, or sometimes because people are thinking of people like me. They're thinking of middle-class cis white men, and they're not thinking about the majority of the LGBTQ plus communities that are in places and spaces where they're discriminated against. I guess I want to talk about two different things. One is how intersectionality impacts both allyship and leadership, but also sort of how we can bridge that gap between being supportive of communities and having our support be active allyship. So both of you have intersectional identities. And from my vantage point, they have, it's almost like speaking multiple languages. It has afforded you the ability to understand places and communities that I cannot, that others cannot. But that's also a pretty heavy burden. It means having to both be an ally and need strong allyship. Nellie, how has intersectionality impacted your role as a leader and your role as an ally?
So, first, I think it's important to point out that, the word intersectionality actually comes through the legal world, and it came to fruition through evaluating the different ways that certain people are impacted by different laws, specifically in the employment law space. So if somebody was being discriminated against in an employment setting, is it because they are a certain race? Is it because they're a certain gender? Is it because they're a certain age? Or is it a variation of all those different things? And how did that drive whatever discriminatory conduct they were facing? And in many ways, I think that nobody exists in each space in all their identities at an equal level. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you're facing something, your biggest barrier, your biggest difficulty might be what your gender is. You might be facing a hostile environment because of that, or your race, or your whatever it is. I really think that when you exist in a place of where you are aware of all of your identities and all of your privileges, that allows you to see the same in others and know that others have those experiences too. I never make assumptions about the people who are around me and what their life fully entails, what their abilities and disabilities, socioeconomic status, where they came from, what their cultures are. I think that existing as a human being that has multiple layers to my identity lets me know that everybody does. Everybody does. It's just that certain folks have parts of their lives and their existences that draw harm, that draw hatred, that draw biasy, and some people don't. And so I think having that myself lets me know just from a truly unshakable place that everybody has a lot of different things about them that can cause them to not be able to get to certain places because of how other people perceive them. I think that if everybody just stopped and thought about all the differences just in their own skin and who they are, where they come from, what their family history is like, if they even have a family or know their family, what country they came from, how much money they have or do not have, what languages they can speak or cannot speak. Everybody has this. And then think about what your own identity is and what you have. Has that ever prevented you from doing something you want to do? Have you ever had to hide that about yourself to be able to get a job or to earn the respect of a colleague or something? I think that intersectionality or just existing with multiple different identifying factors about yourself really, if you're aware of who you are, you'll see that everybody has this. Everybody has a lot of different things about them that can stop them from being able to move forward in life, or is a real great privilege for them that propels them forward in life. And just being aware of almost those sociological levers. I almost feel like it's like the train tracks. For some people, it's a speed train and there's no diversions, and for others there are. So I think that it allows us to have a different empathy and a different view on how we all exist.
You know, Deja, I have talked often about this sort of weird sociological issue that I call the privilege of privilege. And it is this thing in sociology in the United States where people who have a particular privilege are more likely to allow someone to sort of challenge the problems of that privilege if they share it with them. And some days that really ticks me off. I'll give you an example. Who better than a woman who has faced misogyny and sexism to explain to a broken sexist mind why that is wrong? But this sociological effect says that that same broken sexist mind is going to give a pass to a man to say those same things because he will identify with that person. It's always frustrated me, but it also is part of the reason why it's not enough for men to just not be sexist themselves. They have to be anti-sexist because that broken sexist mind is giving them higher weight, their opinion a higher weight than the people who are victimized by their discrimination. It is part of the reason that I believe allies are so wildly important in the LGBTQ equality sphere, not just because there is strength in numbers. And if you combine LGBTQ people with our allies, we make up a majority. It's because our allies happen to have the sort of superpower, the super sociological power of being able to best convince our enemies and our opponents why they might be wrong about us. And that is because they are of them. They are like them. And the privilege of privilege, this sociological effect, tells us that they will give a pass to that person. Our straight friends, our straight allies, when they confront our opponents, those opponents give them that second, that minute, that week maybe to challenge that privilege because they don't see self-interest in it. It must be about their values, their morals, their ethics, because it's not about themselves. You know, when we talk about marriage equality, it was so that we could get married. When we talk about anti-bullying legislation, it's so that we don't get bullied, versus when you hear it from our straight allies. In the time that we have left here, what are some of the things that you both hope that straight allies that are listening to this can think and do in the next days and weeks to best help move forward our rights and the support for us? What are some of the ways that we can empower our straight allies to behave, to act, to say, to do over the next couple of weeks that will have made this worthwhile? And the question is to both of you.
So I would say, to be honest, I often would have to say this in government work. I still say it today. I think right now we're hearing a lot of things, and especially during Pride Month, where our allies and people are hopefully soon to be allies, maybe think that LGBT people are asking for special rights or more rights, that here the LGBT people, they want gay marriage and they want that, you know. I would just hope that every ally out there, that every great government servant out there who's listening to this realizes LGBTQ people are not asking for anything special, nothing. We are asking for the same things that everyone else has. We are simply in the minority population here of everything that this world has. When we say that we want to get married, we want to get married just like you want to get married. When we say we want to be able to go to a job and not be fired because of our gender identity, well, same thing for everyone, right? Nobody wants to be fired because of who they are. We're not asking for special rights. We're asking for the same rights. That's all. There's just so much fewer of us that sometimes we have to be loud, and people think that we want more than the average rest of the population. We don't. We just want the same. And so when you hear LGBT rights, what we're saying is, please let us be with you and just like you. Please protect us the way you would protect your own, and the way that you want to be protected and respected and have a future for whatever you want. Everybody, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We just want that same option and opportunity. That's all.
Deja, what do you want people who are listening to know, who are allies? What do you want them to know or to be empowered to do in these next weeks and months because of this Pride Month?
Honestly, just speak up for what's right and wrong. And like Nellie just said, like I have conversations with so many people on a regular basis that are like, well, I just don't get it because you already have rights. So what is it, you know, and it's like, okay, yeah, I do have some rights, but right now I don't have the right to not be fired from a job. I don't have the right to not be denied housing. I don't have the right to not be denied a hotel room when I'm traveling, because I travel quite a bit. And so understanding, like Nellie said, just understanding that we're not asking for special rights. We're just asking for the same right that you already have. But speaking up for us, even though we're not in the room, shutting down those conversations um, when we're not a part of that conversation in order to protect ourselves, you being the voice in that conversation, say, well, actually, that's not right. Actually, that's not what it is. Actually, that's not how you should refer to them. Actually, that is, if it's a transgender person, just making sure the person is using, the other people in the conversation are using the correct pronouns. It's just simply speaking up. That's honestly all it is. And it's not asking you to get into fights with people and knock down dragouts or big arguments. Just simply using your voice if you are present in a space that is not an inclusive space, using your privilege to speak up for those that are not in the room. That's all.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And I've seen this modeled and I've tried to model it myself, and you see people get it wrong. And sometimes it requires an awkward moment. Sometimes it requires an awkward interaction. It doesn't require much more than that, though. And that's always, I think, a fear that people generate in their head, that if I stop this homophobic joke, that I somehow have to defend, against all attacks. Or if I don't know the answer to this, then I shouldn't interject. That's just not the case. Most bad actors, most people who use homophobia or transphobia or xenophobia or sexism or discrimination or racism, when they use it and when they do it, they know what they're doing. What they're often counting on is that everyone else in the room's level of discomfort will exceed their level of engagement. And don't let it. Practice it. As Nellie said earlier on, this is about practicing. And I find that, like all things, you get better at it as you practice it. Sort of when and how and with what veracity and what volume to interject, because what you'll find is it doesn't take much. It doesn't take a whole lot of veracity. It doesn't take much volume. One thing that I hope you'll think of or you'll remember as leaders in the community, as allies, is something that I think right now, maybe not all of our allies know. We talked at the beginning of this about the fact that trans people in particular and our youth are heavily under attack, that the vast majority of these nearly 600 bills are really attacking the trans community, and they are attacking kids. And I think there's a mistaken belief among both our enemies, well, maybe mostly our allies, that the reason that's happening is it's an attempt to sort of just split the community in a way that we'll start to pick off parts of our community, and that the trans community is the most somehow susceptible to being bifurcated from the larger LGBTQ plus community, the sort of low-hanging fruit. And the answer is the exact opposite. Every major advancement in LGBTQ equality history in the United States has come with the leadership of the trans community. Every single one. When you see our enemies attacking the trans community, know they are attacking our leaders. They are not attacking our outliers. Don't think, well, they'll never get to the actual LGB community. They might get to the T community. They're attacking the leaders of the LGBTQ plus equality movement. It is nefarious, it's insidious, and it is intentional. Also, the reason you see our children being attacked is because they're attacking our future. I cannot imagine anybody sitting back while someone's leaders and their future were being attacked and doing nothing. As you've heard here, it doesn't require much. Soft diplomacy, soft leadership can be some of the strongest leadership imaginable. I hope that you'll also understand that these are lessons that apply they apply all months of the year, and they apply in so many situations. The strongest men in my life don't need a woman to be in the room to stop a sexist joke. The strongest people in my life don't need a person of color to be within earshot to tell somebody else that their racist inference is wrong. And you don't need to be thinking of your LGBTQ friend or your family member or your neighbor when you stop anti-LGBTQ sentiment. Although if you need to think of somebody, think of the three of us, because it is deeply meaningful and it is wildly effective. With that, I want to say thank you again to Donna. I want to say thank you again to Montgomery County. This, like all things, is ongoing. We celebrate Pride this month, but we think about Pride, we think about equality, and we act upon those thoughts all year long. And I hope that all of you who are listening, all of you that have participated, and all of you that will watch this later on will know that we get it wrong all the time. We make mistakes. The question is, what do we do after those mistakes and after we've gotten it wrong? If we get back up and if we move forward with good intent, then we are all in this together. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you for all the ways that you're going to move forward, making somebody else's life a little more comfortable, a little more inclusive, and allowing them to be the leaders that they're going to grow to be. Much appreciated all. And have a great rest of your Pride Month.